I like to say that when we protect our life here in California, it matters for our communities, it matters for California, and it matters for the world. When we protect plants, we protect everything. And that's because plants are the foundation of all of our terrestrial, our land-based ecosystems. California has 6,500 types of native plants, more than any other state in the nation. And there's a whole web of life that rests on that.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast Network. Here, our purpose and passion are simple: to highlight the incredible nonprofits that make our communities stronger. Each episode is a chance for these organizations to tell their story in their words, sharing not just what they do, but why it matters to the people they serve, to their supporters, and to all of us who believe in the power of community. Through podcasting, we hope to amplify their voices, inspire connection, and give them one more tool to reach the hearts of donors, partners, and neighbors alike. This work is made possible through the generous support of our founding partners. CapTrust, offering fiduciary advice for endowments and foundations serving Sacramento, Roseville, and Folsom, and online at captrust.com. And Western Health Advantage, a local not-for-profit health plan that believes healthcare is more than coverage. It's about caring. From supporting the American Heart Association to making arts and wellness accessible for all, Western Health Advantage truly delivers health care with heart. Learn more at westernhealth.com. I'm proud to welcome our newest partner, CORE, Executive Leadership and Comprehensive Support Services, working in it so you can work on it. Visit cxore.com. Today's conversation is rooted, quite literally, in place, stewardship, and long-term thinking. I'm joined by Dr. Jun Bando, Executive Director of the California Native Plant Society, an organization that has spent decades protecting California's native plants and the ecosystem that depends on them. Jun has spent her career in nonprofit, academic, and public sectors developing inclusive teams and strategies. She's worked in the U.S. Department of State and Defense and is now steadfastly committed to protecting biodiversity. But this conversation isn't just about plants. It's about community, resilience, and what it means to care for something that will outlast us all. The California Native Plant Society sits at the intersection of science, advocacy, education, and grassroots action. From habitat restoration to climate resilience, from policy work to hands-on volunteerism, they are shaping how Californians understand the land beneath our feet and our responsibility to it. In this episode, we talk about why native plants matter now more than ever, how conservation work shows up in everyday communities, and what gives California Native Plant Society hope as they look ahead in a time of environmental uncertainty. Dr. Jun Bando, welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast Network.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
This is a bit of an unusual conversation we're going to have because usually we talk about things that interface and relate to people and how it affects the community with the interaction of some sense of a person. But today we're talking about something a little bit different. It does affect the people, but the topic of the conversation while living isn't a human. And so I'm really excited to get into this conversation. CNPS, California Native Plant Society. And when we think of it, there's a lot of imagery that could come to mind. And people can think about, gardening in their yards. They could be walking in the desert in Southern California and seeing, just the natural plant life that's in a desert. They could be checking out the redwoods. And then on the other hand, we could have somebody saying, who cares? I live in the city. I'm not into that. I don't camp. I don't like nature to the extent of what they don't know. So tell us why there is a California Native Plant Society.
Thanks, Jeff. I love this question. I'm going to start big.
Please.
And you touched on some of this in the way that you frame this. But I would start out by saying that California is really, really special in terms of the nature, the life that's found here in California. A lot of that has to do with our plants. So what's here is really special. What's here is worth protecting. And when we protect native plants, we protect everything. So I'll say a little bit more about each of these things.
Please.
California is home to the tallest, largest, and oldest trees in the world. We have these desert super blooms following wet winters that can be seen from space. These iconic landscapes like the coast redwoods or oak woodlands. And these are part of what make us special as California. They make California a special place to live. California is also one of 36 global biodiversity hotspots. So these are the 36 places on the planet that are recognized for the life that they sustain. The life that's found in these places is especially diverse, especially unique, and especially threatened. And a lot of our global systems, when we think about the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the regulation of our global climate is especially dependent on the ecosystems that are found in those 36 global biodiversity hotspots. So I like to say that when we protect our life here in California, it matters for our communities, it matters for California, and it matters for the world. And I said, at the start that when we protect plants, we protect everything. And that's because plants are the foundation of all of our terrestrial, our land-based ecosystems. And so native plants not only support the things that eat them, for example, but there's an entire web of life that depends on these native plants and the ecosystems they support. California has 6,500 types of native plants, more than any other state in the nation. And there's a whole web of life that rests on that.
And I would imagine that we probably are most eco-diverse in the United States. I took a trip to Costa Rica a couple of times, and it's amazing they have all these miniature microclimates. And so do we, right here in California. You don't have to go anywhere to see it. It happens to be here, and we don't have obviously everything, but we have so much of it relative to any other state.
We do. I mean, what's found here in California is truly extraordinary, and we are in, as I said, a global biodiversity hotspot. And so when we ask the question of why is there a California Native Plant Society, I'll step back in time. In 1965, a group of activists in the Bay Area came together, a group of scientists and conservationists and gardeners came together to support and to protect a native plant garden in Berkeley at the Tilden Regional Park that was threatened at the time. And following the success of their effort to protect that, they realized that there was an opportunity to advance this broader mission of protecting California's extraordinary native plant diversity. And so today in 2025, we're almost at the end of 2025, we're celebrating our 60th year as a nonprofit here in California with a mission to protect California's native plants and their habitats.
And seeing how much it's grown over the course of those years, obviously for all the right reasons, because we challenge that environment every single day with whatever we do as mankind and how we're working ourselves to recognize the significance of what we're doing if we should damage, destroy, or eradicate some of that.
Oh, absolutely. I think as we look around us, we see signs of major environmental challenges. We're seeing climate change, we're seeing the loss of nature, the collapse of ecosystems, and plants are at the intersection of all of these urgent challenges and opportunities to advance solutions. One thing I want to go back to, Jeff, as well is, we talked about the people connection, and that's so fundamental to our work. Our mission is to protect California's native plants and their habitats. And a lot of our work takes place in cities and other parts of what we call the built environment. And so there are opportunities for us to connect people to nature, both in the natural habitats of these native plants, but also close to where people live, work, and play. And there's an increasing awareness of the need and opportunity to help foster those kinds of connections close to home. Humans are a part of nature. We've had a lot of those connections severed over time, over generations. But that really is a fundamental piece of our work, is that connection between people.
And I'm glad you addressed that, because so many people living in a urban environment don't recognize, don't see, because they don't see. They don't see all that plant life. Maybe they have a park, or maybe they have some trees in their neighborhood, but so much of that is lost because they don't recognize it, and they don't recognize the value until they do get out, and until somebody brings them something like, hey, did you hear this episode on a podcast about? Or you're out in the community doing what you do to share the stories and share what it is and the value of it, whether it be through a library or a school or another organization. We just scratched the surface of some of these hot buzzwords: biodiversity, reclamation, restoration. You said climate change. And that list goes on and on and on. And a lot of them are triggers for people to engage, sometimes aggressively and sometimes super passively.
Yeah, I want to react to that in maybe a way that you didn't anticipate, Jeff, because I think they can also be triggers for people to disengage.
That's that passive, I'm out.
Right. And I think one of the things that's really interesting and exciting about working in the environmental community in this moment on native plants and with our partners that are also working on other aspects of conservation is that we have an opportunity to really shine the light on the common ground that we share as people across the political spectrum in the value and the importance of protecting nature. Like, this really should be a nonpartisan, non-political goal.
Could not agree with you more.
When we throw out words like biodiversity or environmental protection or conservation, there often tends to be an association with a certain kind of political agenda. But if you take a step back and you ask people, if you ask most people, do you think that everyone should have access to nature's benefits? Or if I asked you, think about the young people in your life, do you think they deserve a future that's safe and healthy? Most people would say absolutely. And so the things that are required for that future to be possible really transcend a lot of the political dialogue that's happening today.
And I couldn't agree with you more, especially when people realize the value of nature. I mean, without it, we don't have clean water to drink or fresh air to breathe or good food from the planet that we eat, that the animals eat. Even if you're vegetarian, or even if you're non-vegetarian, the animals are vegetarian in many cases. They're eating plant life in order to survive. And, fish, you can't get away from it. Humanity needs it to survive. And if we don't take care of it, we have a problem. And your website is fabulous in terms of the conversation you can have off of all the topics that you've got. Because a lot of us will think plant society. We think of plants. We think of somebody with their plants and the beauty of a rose bush or whatever that particular plant is, but we don't think of it as the value of part of our ecosystem. That plant that may not be edible is absolutely necessary for something else to live.
Yeah, and the beauty certainly is a part of it, too,
yes.
Jeff. It's part of what inspires a lot of people to want to protect these plants and landscapes. And it's all these other things, too. The ecosystem services or ecosystem impacts, the connections for us as humans to these landscapes. That there's an enormous public health and mental health benefit that's associated with all of this.
You're in the state capitol. Obviously, you're based here. Is a lot or the majority or some percentage of your work advocacy?
It is.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I'll talk about a couple of major emphases of our work in a very big picture kind of way.
Yeah.
We launched 2 multi-year biodiversity campaigns this year that are really focused on 2 areas of work. And one is about protecting native plants and their habitats, so defending native plants and their habitats, which I often describe as our conservation campaign. And then we have one that's focused on transforming the built environment with native plants. And I talk about that loosely as our urban biodiversity campaign. These aren't the best labels, but just sort of to help organize these mentally. And in our conservation campaign, which we're calling Saving What Matters Most, Advocacy is a really big piece of protecting native plants and their habitats. But our campaign captures different interconnected pieces of our work. There's an actionable science piece. So we do a lot of science work as CNPS because we have to understand what's out there. In order to know what to protect, we have to understand what's out there. We have to understand what's under the greatest threat. And that allows us to then focus our advocacy. And we do our advocacy work through a mix of movement building and strategic communications. And so those pieces of actionable science, movement building, and strategic communications all connect. And one of the reasons why our advocacy work, I think, is so powerful, we're not a huge organization, but we have an outsized impact. It's because we are speaking from a position of science. CNPS has a very long history of doing very solid science work, and that informs our advocacy and allows us, especially when we speak up as part of coalitions with a really diverse array of partners, our ability to speak to some pieces that are really connected to science adds to the conversation.
I think it would also add value to the potential to demonstrate impact.
Absolutely.
Because you've got it up front, and you can say, here's what this program did, here's where we are, here's what we've restored demonstrably.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the context of our urban biodiversity campaign, advocacy is a big piece of that as well. That campaign has 5 strategies, and I'll mention them really briefly because they give you a sense of the breadth of the work that we're doing. But those 5 strategies are science, industry partnership, policy change, so driven by advocacy, and then marketing and education. And for the kind of systems level change that's required to make native plants the default choice, the obvious choice, when we're landscaping or gardening in the built environment, that's going to take policy change. And so advocacy is a really important piece of that campaign as well.
How do you get your messages out? What have you found to be the most effective way to communicate to the state of California residents?
Yeah, we use a variety of tools and media, Jeff. We have, as many nonprofits do, we have an email newsletter, so we have e-news, social media, our website, of course, which you've taken a look at. We have a couple of membership magazines. One is Flora, which is our general membership magazine, and then we have a scientific magazine or scientific journal called Artemisia. So those are also important vehicles. Once every 3 years, we host a big conference. And so in February 2026, we'll gather in Riverside with people who are working on different aspects of native plant protection and appreciation from across the state. So that's another important venue for connection and learning and messaging. And we also do a lot of work through these bigger environmental coalitions. And so oftentimes, even though, we're really passionate about plants, and we recognize that focusing on the implications for native plants of certain policies, for example, whether they're opportunities or threats, aren't going to move the needle in themselves. But when we join our voices with those of other partners who also are coming in with different interests, and we focus on that common ground, we're able to really
beyond the commoner like myself, who I'm a state resident, I appreciate nature, I recognize the significance of protecting it. You also work, I'm imagining, to a great degree with some of our indigenous peoples and tribes throughout the state who are very, very much about the land. What does that look like? How does that relationship work?
We have partnered very closely with some tribes and indigenous partners. And I think probably the best example of that is in our work in support of national monuments establishment here in California, which also advances our work toward California's 30 by 30 goal.
Which we're going to touch on in just a second.
Okay.
Let's pause the conversation with Dr. Jun Bando with the California Native Plant Society to allow those who help us plant seeds of support for nonprofits to share a message with us.
We are really excited to be part of the family and contribute to the work that you all are doing. CORE provides fractional and interim executive services, along with comprehensive back office solutions that go into our client sites and do the work to give them the capacity they need in order to move through transitions, whether that's planned or unplanned. Or companies also work with our accounting and finance, back office solutions, human resources, technology, and administration. The reason why our back office solutions add value is because we save them time and money, anywhere from 20 to 30% of what they would spend on that back office solution. We work in it so they can actually work on it. CXORE.com and contact me directly at DTEAT@CXORE.com.
If you're interested in learning more about how CORE may help your organization, visit CXORE.com.
Hello, this is Scott Thomas with Cap Trust in our Sacramento office. I specialize in working with local nonprofits and associations. Annually, we survey private and public nonprofit organizations across the country to better understand challenges they see in today's environment. In our more recent survey, we heard concerns about proper board governance, mission-aligned investment, and how to implement alternative investments. If you would like a copy of the survey or to discuss your organization, look me up, Scott Thomas at captrust.com.
At Western Health Advantage, healthcare isn't just a service. It's a shared value. As a nonprofit leader, you need a health plan that understands the importance of mission-driven work. Western Health Advantage is a local, not-for-profit health plan that supports organizations like yours with affordable, flexible coverage options for your team. But what truly sets them apart is their commitment to community, supporting nonprofits like the American Heart Association, Sacramento Ballet, and the Crocker Art Museum's Pay What You Wish Sundays. With access to top-tier providers and dedicated local support, Western Health Advantage is more than a health plan. It's a partner in your purpose. Explore your options today at westernhealth.com. Western Health Advantage, healthcare with heart, designed for those who give back. There's an executive order, I believe, 30 by 30 by 2030. So explain what that is. There's a lot of 30s in there.
Sure. Yes, 30 by 30 is California's goal of protecting 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. It is a goal in California that's actually in state law. So it was in an executive order and is now actually part of state law.
Okay.
And it's part of a global movement to achieve this 30% goal by 2030. It's a climate strategy. It's a biodiversity strategy. 30% is the minimum that scientists worldwide agree needs to be protected to stem the extinction crisis and avoid the worst impacts of climate change.
When did that start? Do you know when the orientation of the 30 by 30 was?
Yeah, we're about halfway through.
Okay.
And so we're currently at about 26% of lands and 21% of coastal waters protected in California. And so we've got 5 years to cover the rest of the gap there.
That's good. I would have expected less, quite honestly, because my next question was going to be, surely we're measuring this and we know, but 26 and 21% to me seems really good.
It is really good, and it's going to be a challenge to make it the rest of the way. Mm-hmm. I would note that California is leading much of the world in implementation of 30 by 30. We have a strategy called Pathways to 30 by 30 here in California. And when I say California is leading the world, it's in a few ways. We are leading in terms of getting close to reaching those numerical targets, but it's not just about reaching a number. California is also basing its efforts on one of the most robust, one of the strongest definitions of durable conservation in the world. So when we say we're protecting 30% of our lands, we're also protecting what's in those areas in a way that's more effective and durable than if we didn't have such a robust definition of conservation. California has also approached implementation of 30 by 30 in a way that we talk about as redefining what conservation looks like in California. It is, and this links back to what you were asking in terms of tribal partnerships. But California's approach to 30 by 30 is one that recognizes that people are a part of nature. It's centering tribal leadership, tribal partnerships, and also in addition to thinking about biodiversity benefits and climate benefits, also thinking about increasing equitable access to nature for all Californians. And so the way in which the state has approached 30 by 30, and when I say the state, I don't just mean the state government of California, but the people of California and organizations across the state have approached it, really is unique globally.
I love to hear that, because so many things tend to be, political theater or lip service. They just don't happen. But here you have a tangible expectation with a measured goal that is progressing toward the objective, and positively. Even if you don't quite make it, we're not going to stop.
Absolutely. And the rest of the world is watching California. That's been clear. California has sent delegations to global forums on nature and climate, and the world is watching what's happening here because, again, California is leading much of the world in terms of progress, and because we're one of the world's largest economies. We have the will and the resources and the knowledge to do it here in California. And seeing our progress, I think, reinforces for other subnational governments and even national governments that it can be done in other places.
Well, and I like the fact that, we're one of 36 with... We have to be the largest economy of those 36, I would imagine. So we have some clout. And pay attention, everybody. Can you take some of that and tie it to maybe a relevant story where it's impacted lives in some way, shape, or form, or a community that you've seen move in that progression toward 30 by 30? Maybe it's a coastal situation or a desert situation, whatever it may be, where you can actually say, here's what has changed as a result of?
I think about the impacts of 30 by 30 as connecting across those very local community level impacts, Jeff, where we're providing access to spaces and protecting places that are in neighborhoods of communities, in many cases, or near communities. And then those impacts are cascading up to the global level as well.
Maybe an awareness through schools or children or vernal pools that if we destroy these, our kids are coming home and telling us about it now.
Yeah.
We need to keep that, Mom and Dad, because...
Yeah, absolutely. I think awareness of 30 by 30 is growing across the state, and we're hearing more about it at schools. We're hearing more about it outside of science or governmental circles. And I really think about 30 by 30 as being a vehicle for hope, because we look around us at the scale of the climate crisis and the nature crisis, the biodiversity crisis. And people say, well, what can be done? Well, we have a strategy in California, and 30 by 30 is a strategy for addressing those enormous challenges, and it's being implemented at the ground level in communities with local projects, as you've highlighted. And in aggregate, we're having an impact at the state and global levels.
So it's just one little bit at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Right.
As we progress and share and the information gets out. Jun, who are some of the people that you work with from a coalition standpoint, other nonprofits, local agencies in various communities? Who might they be?
All of the above. We've been talking a lot about 30 by 30 and touched on national monument campaigns in California, but I think that's a great example of the breadth of partnerships and coalitions that are responsible for advancing this work. California we've fairly recently had a number of national monuments established or expanded in California. The various Snow Mountain and San Gabriel Mountains national monuments were expanded about a year and a half ago. And then in January of this year, President Biden established the Chuckwalla and Satilla Highlands National Monuments, new national monuments in California. And those national monument designations, those establishments, were the culmination of years of work where we had broad coalitions, including CNPS, supporting tribally led campaigns. When I say broad coalitions, I'm talking about not only other conservation organizations and agencies, as you've mentioned, of course, other tribes, but also veterans groups, small business owners, outdoor enthusiasts from groups that you might not think about as being part of the mainstream conservation community, hunters and anglers and those kinds of recreational groups. So an incredibly broad array of people, communities, governments, and partners who came together because they said, we share a vested interest in protecting what's here, these areas that have high natural and cultural value. We have a vested shared interest in protecting this now and for future generations. And that's the kind of movement building that we're seeing, this, again, surfacing and building common ground around these shared interests.
Which is great to hear, too, because they recognize the value of the infrastructure. If you start taking pieces out of it, whether you're a duck hunter or a deer hunter or whatever it may be, if the environment changes, the animals are gone, too.
Right.
Or if you're a fisherman, or even if you're just an environmentalist who really likes to see what's happening with mushrooms in the forest. I'm stretching a little bit, but everybody's engaged in this thing for the greater good, because if you change one, you start to change everything.
Yes.
And if it disappears, it cascades downward.
And I took note of your choice of the word infrastructure, Jeff, and I want to go back to that for a second, because we often talk about nature and the complexity of nature. You use the term biodiversity, which is a little bit of a jargony term, yes. But what we're talking about is the complexity of life. And so you might say, well, why does this little plant that's found in a couple places in the state matter? Why does this butterfly matter? Why does, choose a species or a and why does that matter? Well, each of these is one of the building blocks of life as we know it. And when we start to lose pieces, as we're doing now, there is a broader impact. And once we lose these building blocks, we can't bring them back.
And something is dependent on each of those building blocks. And it cascades. It's not just one. Once one falls, something else falls as a result of it. Or something to the negative can take over because it can proliferate when there's not something to protect. So, I think people really have to stop and think. And I know the schools seem to be doing a better job of this, to the best of my knowledge. We've had a lot of organizations who are in the school system, and this is a part of the curriculum now. They talk about it, and they talk about it with a lot of interconnectivity to healthy eating. It all comes back to the human.
I think there's a growing realization, Jeff, that these things matter. When I say things like protecting nature, things like a healthy environment, these matter. And I think for many people the question is, well, what can I do about it? Because again, people are seeing the scale of the challenges around us. And the thing is that we can do something about it. And we all must do something about it. And it's our individual actions, but also policies at the state, national, global level that also help make that change possible. But ultimately, it's about individual actions, too.
Right. And those actions require funding. So it leads right into the next question. How is the organization funded?
Yeah. We are funded by a mix of sources. So we rely on the support of generous donors, membership dues, grants, and contracts. Right now,
so there is a fee for service for work that you do?
So we have a number of grants and contracts with state, federal, and other entities. For example, this year, we're working with partners to map more than 20 million acres of vegetation across California, the historic vegetation mapping effort, and that's being supported by state-funded contracts. So yes, fee for services. Yes. But so currently, because of the scale of some of those contracts, half of our revenue, which is about $10 million, is coming in through contracts. And that's this year, and that's been the case in recent years, but that a lot of those contracts will wrap up next year. So our funding blend will shift, and our team will get smaller as well. We've been able to bring on some additional really talented staff to support some of that work.
How many people, let's say on average, do you employ?
Well, we have 62 employees currently. A number of those are supporting, this surge in work around plant science. So we're normally around 50 employees.
Let's imagine for a minute that there's a philanthropic-minded, very engaged individual who understands the nature of what you're doing and goes, June, I've got a blank check for you. If what you can share with me makes sense for me to make that contribution, what would you do? What would it look like? How would things change?
Sure. Well, of course, now I'll sound like the executive director of a nonprofit. I would say, well, I would want to understand what that funder's vision is for the change that they want to bring about in the world. But I would say I would really double down on a couple of things. So one is that actionable science piece of conservation. So we need actionable science to drive the advocacy to protect what really needs to be protected. And so I would double down again on the actionable science, our vegetation mapping, documenting the status and location of rare plants across the state. So we need to know what's out there and what's most threatened in order to know where we focus conservation efforts. So I would again, that actionable science piece. We're thinking about really working with our partners to drive a systems level change in the availability of native plants in California. So thinking roughly about the EVs industry as a model, where you had policies that created incentives or requirements that drove increased production. We're thinking about how that applies in the context of native plants and the built environment. And so we're intending to sponsor a bill in the California legislature in 2027, that's our target, that would help with some of these incentives, remove barriers to the use of native plants in a lot of public landscaping. In order to do that in 2027, we really need to create this groundswell of support in 2026. So there's a lot of work that we're doing right now, CNPS chapters and partner organizations, to advance local resolutions and ordinances that promote the use of native plants in landscaping at the city level, at the county level. And if we can do more of that across the state, we really help to create that groundswell of support that would help us to be successful with legislation in 2027.
And therefore, more contribution would allow you to get deeper into the communities to get that messaging out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can see where you're engaging at that ground level with just basic landscaping in the cities. Now that I can easily relate to that and make sure that it is, proper as opposed to let's just put up a lawn or whatever it may be.
And there's growing interest in gardening for habitat.
Yes.
I hear a lot of interest. People want to learn more about how to be successful. There's often for people, the biggest challenge beyond, how do I get started? And we have a lot of tools to help people think about how to get started. Our CalScape website, for example, has great resources in that regard. But it's challenging for a lot of consumers to find native plants commercially. And so addressing the supply piece, working with industry to address that supply piece, again, facilitated by some policy change at the state and local levels, we really can, I think, help to change the system and make native plants more available.
It seems easier than it is. I know that. I'm just listening to it and going, okay, well, what's the problem? Well, part of the problem I'm even thinking about myself, I don't even know what those plants are. I know what we go to the store to get for the yard, and it's maybe drought tolerant, but we don't know that that's the best plant for the area. So we need somebody to step up and educate us, and they have to fund you to do that.
The education piece is key, too.
Right.
There's a marketing piece, too, so that we're normalizing the idea of gardening in a different kind of way for these kinds of multiple benefits, for supporting nature, saving water, building climate resilience. There's sometimes a different aesthetic, but I think that people see examples of what this can look like, and they're inspired, and they want to know where to go to find native plants. So,
well, there's that application for it.
Absolutely.
Let's go now back to reality. And what is the greatest need of the organization?
I would say the greatest need, and I think about this in terms of meeting our mission, and I think the greatest need is for everyone to be able to see themselves in this work. And native plants and nature touch all of us in different ways. And people are looking for ways to get involved. We're living in this really extraordinary moment where we're seeing attacks on democratic norms and institutions and nature under threat, and people really looking for opportunities to get engaged in their communities and looking for ways to make a difference. And it can be hard in this moment to know where to start. People feel really overwhelmed. And the wonderful thing about the kind of work that we're able to do as CNPS is that we are able to work on these issues at a very, very tangible, local, individual level. And we also work on things at the state level and at the policy level. But the action, so you mentioned earlier, like, well, how would I know where to get started?
Right.
We have a website called CalScape that shows people, ideas for gardening, tells people where they can find native plants. It allows people to identify what would naturally grow where you live. But not everybody has access to a garden, right?
Right.
But the act of planting a native plant in a pot that supports pollinators, that makes a meaningful difference. Signing up to learn more about some of the policy discussions that are underway around biodiversity, contacting local elected officials. There's so many different ways to get involved. We have CNPS members that will go and take their local elected official out on a hike to show them some of the things that they care about. And it's a great opportunity for discovery and shared learning. Of course, not everybody is able to do that or is interested in doing that, but there's so many ways to connect in meaningful ways, meaningful ways.
It's an understanding of your constituents, and if they happen to be interested in that, it's good that you do engage and understand.
Absolutely.
You have a lot of responsibility. I mean, one could say that you're responsible for the plant environment of the state. So you can't get away from it. You see it every time you walk outside. You see a tree, you see a plant, wherever you happen to be. So it's always in your purview. But at some point, you have to let go a little bit. So what does Jun do to relax?
I would say my pastimes are pretty humble, Jeff, but I love to cook. So for me, there are a couple things that really, I guess, are working meditations. Cooking is one, and that's on a daily basis my way to be a little creative and unplug. And I have the privilege of having a small native plant garden.
Oh,
and
good for
so
you.
even just going out for 5 minutes, if there's a break between meetings, that makes me feel a connection to nature that I think is hugely beneficial. And it's amazing to walk outside and see, what's changed since even that morning. It's a constant reminder of the life around us and how everything is always changing.
Yeah, it's so fun. I remember as a kid, even today, for some of the plants, it's like, oh my gosh, look, it grew. Like it's changed.
Yeah.
And I forgot to water it.
Yeah.
And I don't even take good care of it. It still makes it in some cases. But just the beauty, the wonder of it all. And we've got young granddaughters now, and we're seeing them engage in these little things. And we want them to, obviously. Mm-hmm. So, we send them little plant kits and the vegetables that can grow in the garden and things that you can get familiar with that, yes, when it's there, you can eat it. Mm-hmm. You planted it from nothing, and there it is, and it came out of the ground, and you can actually eat it. And so it's really fun to watch that progression, whether it's over the course of a season or if it's, just quickly where you can see that plant has sprouted something. It is amazing. Mm-hmm. Where does one go to get this information? You mentioned CalScape. Is that a part of your website?
There's a link. So CalScape is a CNPS website, and people can access it by going to calscape.org or by going to our cnps.org website.
Okay, and I will have both of those in the show notes for the benefit of anybody listening.
Thank you. If folks are interested in learning more about native plants and understanding what CNPS does and how they can be connected, we have a place on our website that says stay connected, and people can sign up to get information from us, and we have opportunities for people to sign up to be involved in advocacy. We're building a statewide advocacy corps and really excited about the momentum there. We have a conservation toolkit on our website. There are a number of great resources on our website.
Okay, so before we close, this is not one of the questions, but I'm going to ask you it anyhow. favorite plant? And I'll give you one, maybe, vegetable
Sure.
plant, something you can eat, and then one for beauty.
Oh, gosh. Well, this is a really impossible question, right? When you ask me what's my favorite native plant, I'm assuming you're asking
Yes,
native
yes.
plant. So one that I love, and I'll tell you why, is called the desert bluebell. It's a really beautiful plant that grows in the wild and also grows in a lot of home gardens. And I mention this one because it's my dad's favorite plant. My parents immigrated to the United States from Japan more than 50 years ago. And they've always had a garden. A few years ago, we helped them convert their garden to a native plant garden in their front yard, and they're absolutely obsessed with it.
I love it.
And I think I've seen my parents become so connected to the land, the patch of land in front of their home, and so attuned to what's growing there. I feel like it's given them a greater sense of place and connection to California than they've ever had in the entire time that they've lived here. And so that's why, I think about my parents' native plant garden. I think about the plants that they're especially
Perfect.
excited about.
Perfect. And how
So-
sweet is that they have this garden to tend to?
Mm-hmm.
Sense of purpose, sense of engagement, sense of connection.
Wonder,
Yes.
absolutely beauty. Mm-hmm.
And happy daughter. That's really, really neat. Well, Jun, shedding some light on the necessity of saving, protecting, preventing our natural plant ecosystem is really a heavy lift, especially in the environment that we have today in so many different ways. The reality is if we don't pay attention to our native plants, however, like we've just learned, that we could really find ourselves in a world of hurt. And what you do with the organization, your team, to help us understand better, not only in the state of California, but the movement globally of awareness in these 36 places, these biodiverse ecosystems. You're at the forefront of one of them, and the largest one. So thank you and your team for what you are doing for us to understand better the interconnected play of all that plant life.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll take that back to my colleagues. And thank you also for what you're doing and for providing a place for us to help share our work. And
Absolutely our privilege. Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Podcast Network. We hope today's episode inspired you and gave you a deeper look into the work of our local nonprofits. If you believe in our mission to amplify their voices, please take a moment to leave us a positive review and share this episode with a friend. It helps more people discover the incredible work happening in our community. Don't miss future episodes. Subscribe to our weekly updates and monthly newsletter at nonprofpod.com. And if you're part of a nonprofit that would like to be featured, we'd love to hear from you. Just visit the guest tab on our website. The Nonprofit Podcast Network is recorded and produced at Hear Me Now Studio with generous support from our founding partners, CapTrust, fiduciary advice for endowments and foundations serving Sacramento, Roseville, and Folsom, and online at captrust.com. And Western Health Advantage, local care, community impact. Find the plan that fits at westernhealth.com. And to our newest partner, CORE, interim and fractional executive leadership, comprehensive back office support services. We work in it so you can work on it. Visit cxore.com.